Welcome back to the channel. Thank you guys for hanging with me on this Thursday. If you've taken some time out of your busy schedules to support my channel by hitting that like or subscribe button, thank you. All right, so the Alabama rig was this bait, came out of nowhere, won everything, and you had to throw it. There was really no other options. Now, we are seeing this 12 years later with the invention of forward-facing sonar, and more importantly, the shaking a minnow technique out in the middle of the lake, fishing for bass that should be resting, should not be fished for, and that's what's dominating. And as much as people want to refer to this forward-facing sonar, live sonar, as a tool, it's more of a technique, because this is the most important factor in you catching bass. It's not the line, the rod, the reel, or the angler. It's more so about the electronics. So the electronics has become the technique when you do refer to it as, you know, shaking a minnow or whatever you want to call it. Now, there are other ways to catch bass with forward-facing sonar, but I just want to talk about the shaking a minnow technique, because if my ideas that I've learned from what happened to the Alabama rig come true, the forward-facing minnow shaking technique is going to be the first one to change, because that's the one that is most popular. Most of the fishermen that are trying to get better with forward-facing sonar are going out and learning that first. And that seems to be the deal when it comes to spotted bass, smallmouth, the fish that are a little bit easier to catch, and that's set up really well for forward-facing sonar. Highland reservoirs, lakes that just tend to have a lot of fish in that zone where the live sonar really shines. So we'll just refer to the shaking of the minnow technique in this video, where I try to make some correlation with the Alabama rig and what happened. So let's go back to the fall of 2011. This is when the bait was first released to the public. Happened in a tournament, Lake Guntersville. The whole world got to witness what you can do when you take 5 swim baits and put them on 5 wires, making the Alabama rig, and it dominated. You talk to the good fishermen on Guntersville. Guntersville, I guess, was probably the best possible place for this, because we have grass. Bass like to suspend just a little bit over the top of the grass. We also have a lot of creek channels and main river channel where bass kind of suspend off of spots, and the Alabama rig was mopping up all the bass. So when winter rolled around, which we later figured out was the best time to throw the Alabama rig, it dominated the winter trails, and then it creeped into the spring before the bass really moved shallow. Pre-spawn bass were being caught at a rate that no other bait could compete with. So the best fishermen on Guntersville took every rod and reel and other bait out of their boat and just threw the Alabama rig, and that's where all the money was being won. It's a lot like forward-facing sonar now. If you want to win, you want to make a top 10, forward-facing sonar in those colder months is 100% the deal. Well, this was 2011 where it was put on the scene. 2012 it dominated. 13 it dominated, and then a little bit later than that, it started becoming more of just a conditional technique, like all other bass fishing techniques, where it's going to have a time of year where it really shines. It's going to have a specific condition that it works in. It's not a magic bait you can just always throw, even though sometimes when it's on, it does feel like a magic bait, but that's all baits. So let's go back to what the main tours did with the Alabama rig, because Bassmaster said, no way, one bait, one hook, we're not going to have it ever. So we never got to see the best fishermen in the world play with this technique. FLW kept it around for 2 years with their best fishermen, and we got to witness basically an evolution to where we were changing baits, and then what basically got it banned was we were just taking one Alabama rig and turning it into 5. We were clipping Alabama rig onto the bottom of another Alabama rig, onto another, onto another. And it just kind of became what forward-facing sonar is becoming, where we're not just using one transducer. We've got transducers all over the boats, and we're totally changing the way we fish to incorporate different ways to use forward-facing sonar. We're putting trolling motors on our power poles. We're incorporating all of our stuff on the boat to revolve around forward-facing sonar. And that's what was happening with the Alabama rig until they said, okay, enough's enough. We'll just get rid of it. The lower tours, less hooks, less blades, less baits, all of that. So they put a little bit of, they basically tried to marginalize it as much as they could without totally banning it on the lower levels, and then they got rid of it at the higher levels. So we have yet to see that, and I don't know if we ever will. We definitely won't in 2025, but as a fisherman, I can tell you a lot about the Alabama rig that I think could show what could happen in the future. So let's go to like 2015, because that's when I started to see some things change drastically with the Alabama rig. So in 2012, 2013, it almost basically you had to throw it at every tournament at least a little bit, or you just weren't going to do well. And I think that's where we're at right now. We're in that stage right now currently with forward-facing sonar, where you have to go try it. Doesn't matter where you're at, you have to go use it a little bit, check it, or you're going to do horrible in the tournament, because there's a good chance that it's probably going to work. That's what I mean by that, is there's a better chance than not that this is where a lot of the money is going to be won, and this is where the tournament's going to be won. So if you want to win, you want to have a good tournament, you have to go make a certain portion of that your practice. And I think what we're witnessing with a lot of the younger fishermen is, if you go and practice all 3 days or 4 days, 5 days, however many days you spend on the water before the tournament starts, focusing just on forward-facing sonar, then that is what it takes to do well in the tournament. And then just roll with forward-facing sonar the entire tournament. That's kind of what's going on. That's what was happening with the Alabama rig in 2012, 2013. Now, as we started moving on, fish had now seen this bait for 3 years. We get to 2015. I started witnessing things where, let's say the tournament starts on Thursday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, you'd crush them on it. You'd catch them big every day. And then by the time the tournament rolled around, because everyone was probably throwing an Alabama rig, it went from 100 to 0. You would catch 2 or 3 fish. And I think a big part of that was conditional. You know, when a bait first jumps onto the scene, the bass have never seen it, it's not as much conditional. You know, obviously it's going to work better on days where the conditions are suited, but then there's also days where they just bite it because you are putting it in front of enough fish to where they see it, they don't care, and they go and eat it. Now bass have been around it enough to where they're not swimming it down from what feels like a mile to come eat your bait. That will begin to happen in the forward-facing sonar world. So what good fishermen do, and I've done other videos on this, is they like to use baits that work in most conditions, work on most lakes, and work on most times of the year. So if your favorite technique, let's say, is a spinnerbait, a spinnerbait works really good on windy days. It works really good on days where bass are tucked down to the bottom. If you don't have that, you're going to have tough days if all you're going to throw is a spinnerbait. You really need conditions to make a spinnerbait work. And I think this is what's going to happen, and I know it happened with the Alabama rig, was it became very conditional. You needed fish suspended. You didn't want fish down to the bottom. You had to get really good at fishing that bait in the correct water column if you did want to get bites. It wasn't like it was when it first came out. You just picked it up and threw it and you were going to beat everybody. So those little things, as the years went on, changed. And this no longer became the winning bait, the top 10 bait, or the most consistent bait. It became a very inconsistent bait, to the point where most anglers said, every time I pick that up in practice and throw it and get some bites on it, by the time I take it to the tournament, I have a bad tournament. It's heavy, it's hard work throwing it, and I don't know when it's going to go from hot to cold, and that's a big problem in fishing. Typically, that's your biggest problem that you run into. You don't know when something is going to go from being really good to really bad. You just try to stay away from those type situations. If it's the area you fish, maybe there's a bunch of boats in there, you're catching them every cast, and then you're not, the people that were in there caught all the fish, so the next day you show up, there's nothing left. Or it's a bait that you just need a rain or wind or clouds or something very specific to catch them on it. Well, that blows out and you just have sun and they stop biting and you don't know what other baits you have in your tackle box that will work. So when you have a technique like going out in the middle of the lake, looking for bait balls, looking for fish, and then you get your bait up to it and it swims away, you're dedicating a lot of time to a technique like that. So as more and more fishermen go out there and pressure those fish that had zero pressure 3 years ago, that are now being pressured more than any other fish on the lake, that's going to change them. The pinging of the transducer is going to change them. The fish that are out there that have been caught and are continuing to swim around out there and be fished for again and again, they're not going to continuously bite baits one after another. They're not going to continuously bite that JDM minnow that everyone's throwing time after time. Things are going to change with that. And the more time you spend working on that, trying to catch those fish, the more eggs you put in that basket, the further you're going to get away from all the other conventional techniques. So I did my last video saying the conventional fishing is improving as a whole. Fish aren't easier to catch, blah, blah, blah. They're not, but you get more room, and room is a good thing when you're fishing shallow. When you're fishing the bank, you want to have a lot of that bank to yourself. You're getting that. So that's what we found with the Alabama rig was, man, it can be so good when it's good, but when it goes cold, I bombed. I had the worst tournament ever. Every time I pick that bait up, it looks like it's heading in the right direction, and then it just bombs. That may be what we see with forward-facing sonar, where, man, it was going so well. I was winning. I was top 10ing, and now every time I just look at that screen all day, I finish 100th place. That can happen in fishing. We've seen that happen from some of the best fishermen in the world. They went from being the best in the world to bombing every tournament. Lakes that were the best lakes in the country, you can't catch a bass there anymore. Baits that were so good until everyone started throwing them, they produce 50% of what they used to. So fishing is very fickle. The techniques, the lakes, the fishermen, everything about it. So right now, forward-facing sonar is on top, but it could plummet. That technique of shaking a minnow could go down quickly if it's anything like the Alabama rig. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the water.